Most people think workplace stress starts with one simple problem: too much work, too many tasks, and never enough time. And when it is not the workload, people usually point to the next obvious suspect: a bad boss. But psychology research is revealing something different, something that explains workplace damage in a much deeper and less obvious way. The biggest source of workplace harm is not the workload, not the deadlines, and not even the person signing your review. It is something harder to name, harder to prove, and once you notice it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. This is office politics, but not the loud, obvious version people usually mean when they use that phrase. Usually, people mean the coworker who steals credit, the manager who plays favorites, or the person promoted despite doing less. Those visible behaviors are real, and they are infuriating, but they are symptoms, not the thing that actually hurts most. What really does damage is the slow, quiet process of being left out of things that were never formally announced. It is the meeting that happened without you, discovered only when someone references a decision you never even heard discussed. It is the chat channel everyone seems to use except you, with no clear moment when you were left off. It is the lunch group that somehow formed months ago, and you genuinely do not know when it became a thing. It is the inside joke everyone instantly understands, while one person smiles politely and stays completely silent. None of these moments look openly hostile. Nobody seems to be trying to hurt you, and that is exactly why they sting. Task-based stress usually has an endpoint. The project ends, the deadline passes, and the difficult conversation is eventually over. Your brain can process that kind of stress, resolve it, recover, and then move on once the event is finished. Political stress is different. It has no clean endpoint. It is diffuse, ambient, and never clearly begins or ends. You cannot resolve it because you often cannot even name it. You just feel a background hum of unease. And neuroscience shows why. Social exclusion activates some of the same brain systems involved when your body feels physical pain. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex lights up when you feel left out, ignored, or rejected, meaning your brain reads exclusion as real hurt. So your workplace may not just be annoying you. It may be affecting your body, your stress system, and your brain physically. To see how deep this goes, look at one famous experiment that exposed just how powerful even tiny moments of exclusion can be. In the early 2000s, researcher Kipling Williams designed a study that became hugely influential in social psychology. He called it cyberball. Participants were told they were joining a simple online ball tossing game with two other people. Nothing serious, nothing emotionally important. But the two other players were not real participants at all. They were programmed responses controlled by the experiment. After a few normal throws, the pattern changed. The program simply stopped passing the ball back to the real participant. That was the whole event: a virtual ball, strangers on a screen, and only about 2 minutes of exclusion. Even so, participants reported a significant drop in self-esteem after being shut out of this tiny, meaningless game. They also felt less belonging and less control, even though the task itself was trivial and the social stakes seemed non-existent. More than that, their belief that their existence mattered took a measurable hit after this brief, artificial exclusion. Here's the unsettling part. They knew the game did not matter, and still their brains reacted as if something real happened. Now move from the lab to real life. What happens when that same exclusion mechanism runs all day at work? Imagine it not for 2 minutes, but 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, across months and years. It shows up through meetings you were not invited to, and decisions that somehow got made without your input. It also appears in hallway conversations that suddenly stop the moment you walk past, leaving a silence you can feel. This is the key distinction. The issue is not whether people like you. The issue is whether people include you. Those two things can overlap, but they are not the same. Confusing likability with inclusion sends people in the wrong direction. A new framework helps here. People can feel excluded even when nobody actively dislikes them or intends any harm. When people feel left out at work, they often respond by smiling more, agreeing more, and trying harder to seem pleasant. They also work harder, hoping extra output will prove their value and finally earn the inclusion they have been missing. That strategy often fails, because exclusion at work usually is not caused by being unlikable in the first place. The hidden force is inclusion friction, the subtle resistance that shapes who gets naturally pulled into a workplace group. Like any social system, groups drift toward cognitive efficiency, repeating interaction patterns that require the least attention and effort. So people often include whoever is easiest to loop in, not necessarily whoever is smartest, kindest, or most deserving. Even something simple, like sitting on another floor, can make spontaneous updates and casual invitations slightly less likely. Different schedules create friction too. When your timing misses the group rhythm, people can forget to bring you in. Communication style matters as well, especially when your way of speaking or replying differs from the group's default norm. And friction is not hostility. It can appear with no bad intent, no villain, and no conscious plan to harm. But tiny bits of friction accumulate until one person is left outside the loop again and again by default. That is the hard truth. Nobody had to choose your exclusion. The system simply optimized around convenience and ease. So office politics is less a game with winners and losers and more a gravitational field with invisible rules. If you do not understand that social physics, your career can feel mysteriously harder than the actual work requires. Now comes the uncomfortable twist. The same mechanism that makes exclusion painful also makes inclusion feel deeply seductive. Once people see how inclusion works, they may start optimizing themselves to match whatever the group seems to reward. They smooth every sharp edge, hide differences, and trim away anything that might create extra social friction. And yes, that strategy can work for a while by making you easier, quicker, and more automatic to include. But the cost is steep. You may end up accepted inside a version of yourself that no longer feels real. Gradually, you lose track of what you actually think, what you actually want, and what you would choose. Instead of using your own judgment, you start constantly scanning the room for tiny signals of acceptance or risk. That is the darker side of cyberball. People do not just fear exclusion, they reshape themselves to avoid it. In political workplaces, influence is informal, status is unspoken, and power often moves through signals nobody ever explains directly. Important decisions happen in side chats, hallway exchanges, and rooms you did not even know were part of the process. In that environment, the pressure to adapt never switches off. It becomes a constant background requirement for staying connected. So the real damage is not just too much work. Burnout is often coming from something far more socially exhausting. It is the cognitive load of tracking your social standing inside a system whose rules were never written down. You start reading every pause, every invite, every omission, every raised eyebrow as possible information about your place. That is why people burn out. They're doing the job while simultaneously decoding the hidden map around it. So move from diagnosis to action. Here is one small experiment you can try this week at work. Identify one coworker who seems slightly out of the current, not dramatically isolated, just a little outside the flow. Maybe they are less visible, slightly harder to include, or quietly standing at the edge of the group. Send one small message and make it not primarily about work, output, deadlines, or proving anyone's performance. It can be as simple as, "Hey, I'm grabbing coffee. Want anything?" Small gestures lower the social barrier. Or say, "That point you made in the meeting was interesting. I've actually been thinking about it since." This is not manipulation. It is not networking theater. It is a small act of human recognition. What you are doing is reducing that person's inclusion friction by one small notch, which can matter more than it looks. Inclusion usually shifts through tiny repeated actions, not dramatic speeches, policy decks, or one grand organizational fix. When you help someone feel seen, you start noticing the hidden patterns that usually decide who feels inside. And something surprising happens. Reducing someone else's exclusion can make you feel more agency inside the same system. It reminds you the system is not fixed, natural, or inevitable. It is built from everyday choices people keep making. You are not only a target of the gravitational field at work, you are also one of the forces shaping it. A quick coffee invite, a brief update, a simple acknowledgement can shift the loop, changing who feels included and who stays peripheral. Culture is often built less by posters or stated values and more by repeated moments deciding who gets looped in. Being included at work is not some extra perk. It protects mental safety, preserves energy, and lowers that constant background unease. That matters because exclusion is not just irritating. Your brain can register being left out in regions linked to physical pain. A heavy project is visible and ends. Invisible exclusion lingers, harder to prove, and can quietly cut deeper than workload. Stress expands when the experience is real, but too vague to confront, explain, or resolve in any direct way. Naming it, inclusion friction, gives people language for a workplace, pain they felt for years, but could never quite describe. That recognition can be powerful. You realize you are not weak, oversensitive, or imagining it. Your brain was reading exclusion. This insight does not remove office politics. It changes the map, so confusing signals become patterns you can notice more clearly. So return to the original assumption. What if workplace stress was never only about tasks, deadlines, or formal authority? Many people still assume job stress mostly comes from overload, impossible timelines, and an endless pile of visible demands. Others reduce the whole problem to one difficult manager, or a bad structure drawn on the organizational chart. Those things matter, of course, but they explain only part of why people feel drained, tense, and diminished at work. The hidden half is social exclusion, operating quietly through skipped invites, missing updates, and everyday patterns of omission. Office politics is not just conflict, ego, favoritism, or credit stealing. It is also the invisible current of inclusion. Use a different lens now. Watch who gets invited, updated, remembered, and casually pulled into the next conversation. Notice where friction exists before assuming cruelty, and before deciding the whole story is simply that something is wrong with you. One small act of inclusion can weaken the quiet machinery of exclusion because the field is built from everyday choices. The real office stress was never just the task list in front of you, but the social field surrounding every task. Once you see the hidden psychology of office politics, you understand why work can hurt so much without ever looking dramatic.